My name is Talia, and I'm 34 years old, and if you'd told me a chair could change my life, I would have laughed in your face. When my grandmother passed away, she didn't leave behind much, a few old photo albums, her favorite collection of teacups, and a rocking chair that had seen more years than I had. Everyone in the family wanted something valuable from her estate: the jewelry, the paintings, the crystal dishes. No one wanted the chair, but I did, because that chair was her. Every memory I had of her seemed to begin and end in that chair, her soft laughter echoing through the living room as she told me stories from her youth, her frail hands knitting blankets during long winters, her quiet hums that soothed me whenever I cried as a child. When I sat in it, even years later, I could still smell her rosewater perfume faintly on the cushions. It wasn't just wood and fabric, it was a part of my history. When I moved into the little house Drew and I bought on the edge of town, I brought that chair with me, even though it didn't quite match the modern furniture he'd chosen. I remember setting it by the window, where the sunlight spilled through every morning. It looked peaceful there, like it belonged. "That thing's an eyesore," he said one day, wrinkling his nose as he walked past it. "You should have just left it in storage or something." I told him I couldn't, that it was my grandmother's favorite piece. He shrugged, muttering something about how sentimental I always was. I laughed it off at first, but it started to sting. It wasn't the first time he'd made fun of me for holding on to things that mattered. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the way he'd glance at the chair whenever friends came over. He'd joke about it, calling it the relic, or Talia's museum exhibit. Everyone laughed, including him. I forced a smile, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, I hated how easily he dismissed things that carried my memories. One Saturday morning, I woke up and walked into the living room with a cup of coffee and froze. The space by the window was empty. The chair was gone. I set the cup down so hard it sloshed over the edge. "Drew?" I called, my voice sharp. He came out of the kitchen, towel in hand, looking far too casual. "Morning. What's wrong?" "Where's the chair?" I asked. He frowned like he didn't understand. "What chair?" "The rocking chair," I snapped. "The one from Grandma's house. It was right here last night." "Oh," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "That thing. I moved it out to the garage. The room feels bigger without it, don't you think?" I didn't. But I didn't argue either, not yet. I walked to the garage, half expecting to find it sitting safely in a corner. But when I opened the door, I felt my stomach twist. The space was empty. The smell of sawdust hung in the air, and in the corner, I saw something that made my pulse quicken. A crumpled piece of cardboard leaned against the wall, half hidden under some old boxes. It had a few words scrawled across it in black marker: "Yard sale. Everything must go." I turned back toward the house, my breath catching in my throat. When I asked Drew about it again, his tone changed. "Relax, Talia," he said, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "It's just a chair. I sold it this morning. Some old couple bought it for $20. You should thank me, it was taking up space." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it cracked. I whispered, "You sold it?" He shrugged. "You're acting like I gave away gold or something." But he didn't understand, he never did. That chair wasn't about money. It was about memory, about love, about family. I went into the bedroom and shut the door. I didn't cry right away. Not until I sat down on the edge of the bed and realized that something irreplaceable was gone. I tried to tell myself it was just an object, but it wasn't true. That chair was the last piece of my grandmother I had left. When I finally looked in the mirror, my eyes were red and swollen. But my reflection told me something new, something quiet and dangerous. This wasn't just sadness anymore. It was the start of something else. Something that would change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Drew snored beside me, oblivious. My mind kept circling the same thought: who were the people who bought it? Did they even know what they had? I made up my mind right there in the dark. I'd find them. I didn't know how yet, but I would. Because that chair wasn't gone. Not yet. And neither was I. I opened the garage to find the empty space where my grandmother's chair used to be, and a crumpled yard sale sign. The sound of betrayal is silence, the kind that hits harder than any scream. The next morning, I woke up with one thing on my mind: finding that chair. Drew had already left for work, leaving behind his usual mess on the counter. A half-empty coffee mug, his phone charger, a crumpled receipt from the gas station. Everything looked so normal, and yet I felt like my world had tilted overnight. I couldn't shake the image of that empty space in the living room. It wasn't just furniture missing, it was like a hole had been torn through my memories. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. Then I picked up my phone and called my best friend, Cora. She'd known me since high school, the one person who understood how much my grandmother had meant to me. When she answered, I didn't even say hello. "He sold it, Cora," I blurted out. "Sold what?" she asked, her voice still groggy with sleep. "My grandmother's rocking chair. He sold it for $20 at a yard sale." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, softly, "Talia, you're kidding." I wish I was. I heard her exhale sharply. "That man doesn't respect you. Or your family. You need to do something." "I will," I said, though my voice wavered. "I'm going to find whoever bought it." After hanging up, I drove around the neighborhood, looking for any trace of the sale. I stopped at 2 houses on our street that had hosted garage sales recently, asking if they'd seen the chair. Most people looked at me with confusion, shaking their heads. Then, at the edge of town, I spotted a house with an open porch, a cozy-looking place with wind chimes hanging by the door and a "Thank you for shopping local" sign in the yard. Something about it felt right. I parked and walked up the steps, my heart thudding. An older woman opened the door, her face lined but kind. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I heard you might have bought a rocking chair at a yard sale this morning." Her eyes lit up. "Oh yes, my husband and I did. Beautiful old thing, I've never seen craftsmanship like that anymore." "Why?" I hesitated. "It used to belong to my grandmother," I said quietly. "My husband sold it without asking me." She frowned, her kind expression turning sympathetic. "Oh, honey, that's awful. Why don't you come in for a minute?" Her name was Lila, and her husband's name was Henry. Their living room was warm and full of antique furniture, shelves of books, floral curtains, and a faint scent of lavender in the air. It reminded me of Grandma's house. And there it was, my chair, sitting by the window, just like before. I froze when I saw it, my breath catching in my chest. Henry followed my gaze. "We gave it a good cleaning," he said proudly. "It's a solid piece, that one. You don't see craftsmanship like this much anymore." My throat tightened. "Would you be willing to sell it back to me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'll pay whatever you want." Lila and Henry exchanged a look. "We only paid $20 for it," she said gently. "You can have it back for that." Relief flooded through me, but before I could reach for my wallet, Henry added, "Though, there was something strange about it." I blinked. "Strange?" He nodded, gesturing toward the chair. "When we cleaned it, we found something wedged underneath the seat cushion. Looked like an old envelope. We didn't open it, figured it might belong to someone important." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Do you still have it?" Lila reached into a small drawer in a nearby desk and handed me a worn, yellowed envelope. My name wasn't on it, just a few faded words. "To the rightful heir of the Kingston property." My grandmother's maiden name was Kingston. My hands started to shake. "Where did you find this exactly?" I asked. "Right under the cushion," Henry said. "It must have been there for decades." I almost missed it. I held the envelope carefully, afraid it would crumble in my hands. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Would it be all right if I took this too?" Lila smiled softly. "Of course, sweetheart. It was yours all along." I reached into my bag and pulled out a $20 bill, setting it on their coffee table. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." As I carried the chair back to my car, I kept glancing at the envelope in my hand. Something inside rustled faintly. Papers. Maybe. I couldn't wait any longer. Sitting in the driver's seat, I carefully peeled it open. Inside was a folded document, its edges crisp despite its age. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the words. It wasn't a letter. It was a deed. A legal property deed. And the name on it was my grandmother's, Margaret Kingston. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I read it again and again, trying to understand. The address listed was in the next county over. It mentioned full ownership rights and a large tract of land. My grandmother had owned property? Why had she never mentioned it? The weight of the paper in my hands felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. It wasn't just a piece of land, it was a secret. One my grandmother had hidden inside the chair Drew thought was worthless. When I got home, Drew was on the couch watching TV. He didn't even look up when I came in with the chair. You found it? He asked lazily. I did, I said quietly. He smirked. Hope you didn't pay too much. It's just old wood. I stared at him, feeling something shift inside me, something cold and resolute. Yeah, I said softly. Just old wood. He didn't notice the envelope I slipped into my pocket as I walked past him. He didn't see the way my hands trembled. He didn't hear the whisper forming in the back of my mind, a whisper that said, maybe, just maybe, I had more power than I thought. When I knock on their door, the man smiles gently and tells me I might want to sit down before hearing what he found hidden inside the chair. Grief teaches you to hold on, but sometimes, what you're holding hides a secret. The envelope felt heavier the longer I stared at it. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft with age, but the ink was still clear enough to read. Deed of ownership, Margaret Kingston, my grandmother's name, my grandmother's handwriting in the margins. I could almost hear her voice in my head, that gentle tone she used whenever she wanted to tell me something important. My heart thudded as I flipped through the other documents inside. There was a notarized letter from a small law office dated almost 40 years ago, and a hand-signed note that read, "For my family when the time is right. When the time is right." I sat in my car outside Henry and Lila's home for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the letter. The sun was sinking low, spilling orange light across the seat where the chair rested. I ran my hand along the worn armrest, tracing the grooves where my grandmother's fingers used to rest. Somehow, she had hidden this inside all along, a secret, wrapped in love and old wood. When I got home, Drew was still in front of the television, his eyes glued to a football game. The sound of cheering filled the room as I quietly slipped past him with the envelope clutched in my hand. "Where've you been?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "Out," I said simply. He shrugged, uninterested, and turned the volume up. That was fine. The less attention he paid me, the better. In the bedroom, I shut the door and sat on the edge of the bed, spreading out the papers. My hands trembled as I read through the fine print of the deed. It was for a piece of property in the next county, a large parcel of land on the outskirts of town, listed under my grandmother's full name. The words "transferable by direct heir" were written in the lower section, and a small note in her handwriting said, "Talia will know what to do." I bit my lip, the tears coming before I could stop them. I whispered to the empty room, "You always knew, didn't you, Grandma?" It hit me all at once. She must have hidden this because she didn't trust the rest of the family. Maybe she'd been waiting for me to find it, to protect it. But Drew had nearly destroyed that chance. The thought made something burn inside me. He had sold the chair for $20, not knowing he was giving away a fortune, not knowing he had almost erased my grandmother's last message to me. When I walked back into the living room, he finally looked up from the TV. "You seem off," he said. "What's wrong now?" I forced a smile. "Nothing, just tired." He gave me that smug little grin that always made my skin crawl. "See? I told you selling that chair would clear your head. Less clutter, less stress." I nodded slowly. "You're right. I guess some things just work out in mysterious ways." He smirked, pleased with himself, and turned back to the screen. I slipped the envelope into my purse and locked it in my car before bed. I didn't trust him, not anymore. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office. My voice shook slightly as I explained that I needed information about a property deed belonging to a Margaret Kingston. The woman on the other end typed for a few seconds, then said, "Yes, I see it here. The record is still active. It hasn't been transferred to anyone else." "So it's still valid?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. As long as you're her legal heir, you can claim ownership." I hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief. My grandmother had left me more than memories, she'd left me a legacy. I called Cora next. "You're not going to believe this," I said as soon as she answered. "I already don't," she said. "What happened?" I told her everything, the envelope, the deed, the property. She stayed silent for a long time before whispering, "Talia, do you realize what this means?" "I think I do," I said quietly. "It means I own land. Real land. And he has no idea." Her voice sharpened. "Then keep it that way." That night, I sat by the window with the chair beside me again. I had cleaned it carefully, polishing every curve and seam. It looked almost alive in the soft lamplight. I ran my fingers over the seat, feeling the faint ridge where the envelope had been hidden. I thought of all the years my grandmother must have sat there, protecting her secret. Maybe she'd planned for this. Maybe she knew one day someone would try to take everything from me and she wanted to make sure I'd still have something to stand on. As I stared out into the night, I realized how close I'd come to losing all of this. If that kind couple hadn't found the envelope, if I hadn't gone looking, if I'd trusted Drew to do the right thing. No, I couldn't think like that anymore. I wasn't powerless. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. I folded the deed carefully and slid it back into its envelope, tucking it safely into my jacket pocket. I didn't need to tell Drew, not yet. This was between my grandmother and me, and maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something bigger than both of us. As I unfold the deed and see the words full ownership under my grandmother's name, I realize Drew has no idea what he's just thrown away. Sometimes revenge begins quietly, like a piece of paper tucked against your heart. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's handwriting in the margins of the deed, those looping, elegant letters that always made her grocery lists look like poetry. I could almost hear her voice, calm and certain, whispering, "Take care of what's yours, Talia." By morning, I had the document folded neatly in my jacket pocket, pressed close to my chest like a secret heartbeat. Drew was already in the kitchen, humming to himself as he scrolled through his phone. The smell of burnt toast filled the air. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning," I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. He didn't notice anything different about me. Not the slight tremor in my hand, not the tightness in my smile. To him, I was still the same woman, soft-spoken, easy to dismiss. But inside, something had shifted. The part of me that once begged for peace had gone silent, replaced by something stronger, colder, more deliberate. As he left for work, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. Then I grabbed my purse, the deed safely inside, and headed for town. The county clerk's office was small and smelled faintly of paper and dust. The woman at the front desk smiled politely, and when I handed her the envelope, "I just want to verify this," I said. She glanced through it, typing something into her computer. "Well, you're in luck," she said. "This property hasn't been claimed in over 3 decades. As her direct heir, you have full rights to file ownership." I nodded, my palms damp with nervous excitement. "So, it's legally mine?" "As soon as we process the paperwork," she confirmed. "Would you like to transfer it today?" I hesitated only for a moment. "Yes, today." When she handed me the forms, I took a deep breath before signing my name, Talia Kingston Rayner. The pen felt heavy in my hand. It was the first time in years that my signature meant something, that it stood for something that was entirely mine. By the time I walked out of that office, the morning sun was warm against my face, and the folded deed in my pocket wasn't just a document anymore, it was power. Quiet, invisible power. I drove out to the address listed on the deed that afternoon. The land was about 40 minutes away, on the edge of a quiet county road surrounded by rolling hills and tall oak trees. When I pulled over, I stepped out into the crisp air and stared. There it was, an old farmhouse, weathered by time but still standing tall. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging slightly, but it had presence. Even abandoned, it felt alive. Wind rustled through the tall grass, and for a moment, it felt like my grandmother was there beside me. "This is what you left me," I whispered. "This is what you wanted me to find." I walked around the property, my boots crunching against gravel and fallen leaves. The fields stretched far beyond what I expected, acres of untamed land. My chest tightened with awe. This wasn't just inheritance, it was independence. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. When I returned home that evening, Drew was sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand, watching some reality show. He glanced at me briefly. "Where have you been?" "Just out running errands," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You seem different." "Do I?" I asked lightly, setting my purse down. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you're finally over that stupid chair." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." He chuckled and turned back to the TV, satisfied with his own version of the truth. I sat quietly beside him for a while, pretending to watch. He didn't notice how I kept my hand in my pocket, fingers brushing against the folded paper, the deed that now bore my name. He didn't know that while he sat there drinking cheap beer, I had just become the legal owner of something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He didn't know that his careless greed had handed me the one thing I needed most: leverage. That night, when he fell asleep, I sat up in bed and looked at him. His face was relaxed, peaceful even. But all I could see was the man who had sold my grandmother's legacy for $20 without blinking. The man who thought he could decide what mattered and what didn't. I whispered to the dark, "You have no idea what you've done." I reached for the nightstand drawer, sliding the envelope inside before closing it softly. My pulse steadied as I lay back, staring at the ceiling. For years, I had let Drew's voice drown out my own, his sarcasm, his control, his mockery. But now, I had something he couldn't touch. And I wasn't going to waste it. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. About reclaiming the dignity I'd lost somewhere along the way. As sleep finally crept over me, I thought of my grandmother again, her quiet strength, her knowing smile. Maybe she'd known I'd need this one day. Maybe she'd known that when everything else failed, this would give me the courage to walk away. I smile faintly as Drew keeps talking, unaware that I now own something that could change both our lives forever. When people underestimate you, they hand you the keys to your revenge. The next few days felt like living a double life. To Drew, everything seemed normal again. I laughed at his jokes, made dinner like always, and nodded along when he bragged about his job. But inside, something had shifted. Every smile I gave him was a mask, every word carefully chosen. Because I wasn't just living with him anymore, I was studying him. Every night, when he fell asleep, I stayed up late, sitting by the glow of my laptop. The property records were public, and the more I dug, the more I learned. My grandmother's land was no ordinary inheritance. It was a sprawling 42-acre estate on the edge of a growing town. According to the most recent appraisals, the land alone was valued in the six figures, maybe more. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Drew had sold the chair for $20, and in doing so, he'd nearly handed away a fortune. That thought made me both furious and strangely calm. Furious because he had no right, and calm because, for once, I was the one holding all the cards. The next morning, I called the same clerk I'd spoken to earlier. "I just need to make sure everything is legally filed under my name," I said. She confirmed it with a cheerful tone. "You're all set, Miss Rayner. The property now belongs entirely to you." Those words, "entirely to you," echoed in my head like a song I never wanted to stop hearing. Cora came over that evening, curiosity blazing in her eyes. "All right," she said, closing the door behind her. "Tell me everything." I spread the deed and papers across the kitchen table. "It's real. I'm the legal owner now. Grandma must have hidden it for a reason." Cora's eyebrows shot up. "Do you know what this land is worth?" I nodded. "Enough to change my life." Her voice softened. "And Drew? He doesn't know a thing." "Good," she said firmly. "Keep it that way." We spent the next hour discussing the possibilities, what I could do with the land, how to protect it, whether to sell or develop it. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't ready to let it go. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. About what that chair and my grandmother had represented all along. Roots. That night, after Cora left, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened our shared bank account on my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to understand where we stood financially. But the numbers made my stomach drop. Several large withdrawals, all made by Drew. Thousands of dollars. Some marked as personal expenses, others with no note at all. I clicked through the transaction history, my hands trembling. Over the past 6 months, he had drained nearly half of our savings. That quiet anger inside me started to pulse. When I confronted him later that evening, I kept my voice steady. "Drew, I noticed some money missing from our account." He didn't even look guilty. "Yeah, I used some. Relax. I'll pay it back." "For what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just things. You wouldn't understand." That was his favorite line, "you wouldn't understand." I used to let it slide, but now, every time he said it, it sounded more like a challenge. I forced a smile. "You're right. I probably wouldn't." He smirked, thinking he'd won. But I was already planning my next step. The next morning, I drove out to the property again, my property now. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the wind carried that comforting quiet you only find far from town. Standing there, I imagined what I could turn it into: a retreat, maybe. Or a home. A place that was mine, untouched by Drew's arrogance or manipulation. A man in overalls appeared from behind the barn, startling me. He introduced himself as Carl, a local contractor, Been checking on the old Kingston place from time to time, he said. Shame to see it just sitting here. I smiled faintly. Not for long. We talked for a while. He offered to give me an estimate on repairs if I ever wanted to restore it. I told him I'd think about it. When he left, I stood on the porch steps and looked out at the fields again. For the first time in years, I felt free. On the drive back home, I stopped by a small office supply store and bought a safe, nothing big, just enough to hold a few papers. When I got home, I placed the deed and a few copies of it inside. I wasn't about to lose this to anyone. Not again. That night, Drew came home later than usual, smelling of alcohol and cheap cologne. He dropped his keys on the table and gave me a half smile. Why you still up? Couldn't sleep, I said, closing my laptop. He leaned against the counter, his voice slurred. You think too much. That's your problem. I looked at him quietly, letting his words hang in the air. Once upon a time, that would have made me shrink. But now, I only felt pity. When he stumbled into bed and passed out, I opened the safe again, running my fingers over the deed. The faint texture of the paper against my skin made me feel powerful, alive. This was mine, all of it. And he didn't even know. That night, as Drew sleeps beside me, I stare at the man who sold my legacy and start plotting how I'll make him regret every cruel word. Pretending to be naive is the sharpest blade in revenge. After I discovered the full truth about the property and Drew's betrayal, something inside me changed for good. But I didn't let it show. If there's one thing I've learned about men like Drew, it's that they thrive on control. Take that away too quickly, and they panic, they lash out. But if you let them believe they're still winning, they walk right into the trap you've already set. So, I started pretending. For the next few days, I smiled more. I laughed at his jokes again, asked about his work, cooked his favorite meals, everything he expected from me. He relaxed almost immediately, his guard lowering just enough for me to breathe again. While he thought I was healing, I was planning. Each morning, after he left for work, I drove out to the property. The long country road leading there became my daily escape, 40 minutes of peace and clarity before the act had to start again. The farmhouse sat on a small rise overlooking a stretch of meadow and forest. The first time I walked through it, I could almost see my grandmother's touches everywhere, the kind of beauty that hides under dust and time. The floors creaked when I stepped inside, sunlight cutting through the broken shutters in soft golden ribbons. I ran my hand along the banister, imagining what it must have looked like when it was alive, when it was loved. That day, I met with Carl again, the contractor. He walked through each room, shaking his head in quiet admiration. This place has good bones, he said. With some work, it could be worth a lot, maybe even double what the land alone's valued at. Do it, I said. Start the process quietly. I don't want my name attached to any public permits yet. He looked at me curiously but nodded. Understood. I stood outside afterward, watching him drive off, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building, and I was doing it without Drew. Back home, he noticed me humming while making dinner. You seem happy lately, he said, half teasing. I smiled. Maybe I am. He smirked, taking a sip of beer. Guess selling that chair was the best thing that ever happened, huh? It took everything in me not to react. Instead, I looked up from the stove and said softly, maybe it was. He laughed, shaking his head. See? I told you that old junk was holding you back. I turned away before he could see the fire in my eyes. He would never know that. The junk he'd sold had freed me not from clutter, but from him. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I took out my notebook and began writing down everything I needed to do next. Transfer my personal savings into a new account under my maiden name. Start collecting paperwork for the property renovation under a private LLC. Contact Cora to help with the legal setup. Each line felt like a step closer to freedom. By the end of the week, I had quietly opened a new checking account, one Drew didn't know existed. The next morning, I transferred half of the remaining joint balance into it. I justified it to myself by remembering how much he'd already taken. This was just balance being restored. He didn't even notice. I started spending more time out of the house, telling him I'd joined a local book club or was helping Cora with legal research. He never questioned it. He didn't care where I was, as long as I came home to play the part of the wife he thought he controlled. But I wasn't that woman anymore. One afternoon, I stood on the farmhouse porch again, the cool wind brushing my face. Carl and his crew were starting the first phase of the renovation, removing debris, replacing the porch columns, securing the roof. Watching them work gave me a sense of quiet satisfaction. Each swing of their hammers echoed like progress. When Carl walked up to show me the updated blueprints, I smiled. "This is perfect," I said. "But keep the chair room just as it is." He tilted his head. "The chair room?" "The space by the window," I explained. "It's special to me." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't understand. But he didn't need to. That space wasn't for anyone else. A few days later, Drew started to notice my distance. "You've been out a lot lately," he said one evening, setting down his drink. "Where do you go?" I smiled innocently. "Just spending time with Cora, girl stuff." He narrowed in his eyes. "You sure? You've been weird lately." I chuckled softly, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "Maybe I'm just finally happy again." He didn't believe me, but he didn't push further either. He was too self-absorbed to imagine I could ever be planning something behind his back. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling, feeling the faint thrum of power building inside me. The game was working. He thought I was healing. He thought I was still his. But every moment I spent pretending was one step closer to walking away from him completely. In the morning, as he left for work, he turned back at the door. "You look good today," he said with that same easy arrogance. "Thanks," I said, smiling softly. What I didn't tell him was that I was smiling because I had already started living a life where his opinion no longer mattered. He doesn't know I've already begun building the life he tried to sell away for pennies. Greed is never satisfied, it always wants more than it deserves. It didn't take long for Drew's curiosity to turn into suspicion. Men like him, the ones who think they're always in control, can't stand not knowing something. The more I smiled, the more relaxed I seemed, the more it gnawed at him. One evening, he came home with a handful of mail and tossed a few envelopes onto the counter. Among them was a glossy brochure from a real estate firm. I watched as he flipped through it idly until his eyes caught on a headline. "New development, coming to Maple Creek," he read aloud. His tone sharpened. "Isn't that the area near where your grandma grew up?" I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced a casual smile. "Maybe. Why?" He leaned back against the counter, tapping the brochure. "They're buying up old farmland out there, paying big money for it too." I shrugged, pretending to focus on chopping vegetables. "That's interesting." He studied me for a long moment. "You don't seem surprised." I met his gaze briefly. "Why would I be?" "Because," he said, waving the brochure, "that land's worth a fortune. Can you imagine if we had a piece of it?" I turned back to the cutting board so he wouldn't see the small, secret smile spreading across my face. "We did have a piece of it," I thought. "We still do. You just threw it away." He chuckled, tossing the paper aside. "Ah well, missed opportunities, huh?" If only he knew how right he was. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the dim light of the living room and stared at the deed in my hands. The land mentioned in that brochure was close, just a few miles from my property. Developers were already making offers to nearby owners. My grandmother's land, my land, would be worth even more soon. The irony almost made me laugh. I whispered to the quiet room. "You really had no idea what you sold, did you, Drew?" Over the next few days, his behavior grew stranger. He started asking more questions about where I went, who I talked to, why I was so busy lately. His tone wasn't loving or curious, it was sharp, invasive. "Where were you today?" he asked one evening as I walked through the door, dust still on my shoes from the farmhouse site. "With Cora," I lied smoothly. "Again?" He raised an eyebrow. "You two have been inseparable lately." "She's been going through some things," I said, slipping off my jacket. "I'm just trying to help," he grunted, clearly not satisfied, but said nothing more. By then, the renovations were well underway. Carl sent me photos every few days, the new foundation beams, the replaced flooring, the cleaned brick chimney. Watching that place come back to life was like watching myself rise from the ashes. Each nail driven into the wood, each board polished. I started visiting the site later in the evenings to avoid questions. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch after the workers left, sipping tea from a thermos and watching the sun melt into the trees. The air there was still, clean, full of possibility. It was mine. All of it. One night, after another long day, I came home to find Drew sitting in the dark. Only the faint blue glow of the TV illuminated his face. My stomach tightened. I knew that look. Why are you sitting here in the dark? I asked cautiously. Just thinking, he said. His voice was low, unreadable. About how much time you've been spending with Cora. I crossed my arms. What's that supposed to mean? He gave a humorless laugh. It means I'm not stupid, Talia. You think I don't notice you sneaking out early, coming back late, hiding your phone? I forced a calm breath. If you don't trust me, that's your problem, not mine. He stood up, his jaw tight. My problem? You're my wife, Talia. I deserve to know what's going on. I met his glare evenly. You sold the last thing that mattered to me without asking. You don't deserve anything. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Then he sneered. You're acting real high and mighty lately. Got something you're not telling me? I smiled faintly. Plenty. He stared at me for a moment longer before storming off. The front door slammed behind him, and I finally let my composure crack. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from adrenaline. He was catching on slowly, but not fast enough. I called Cora the next morning. He's starting to snoop, I said. Then we move faster, she replied. Get the sale paperwork ready. If developers are buying, we can make this official before he has a clue. Not yet, I said firmly. I'm not ready to sell. Not until I decide how to use it. She hesitated. You're playing with fire, Talia. Maybe, I said. But this time, I'm the one holding the match. That night, when I came home, Drew's tone was oddly calm again. Too calm. He poured himself a drink and gestured toward me. So, how's Cora? She's fine, I said slowly. He smirked. I'm sure she is. I brushed past him, heading for the bedroom, but he grabbed my arm. You know, I went through your purse today, he said softly. My heart stopped. What? He grinned, not kindly, not lovingly, but like a man who thought he'd won. Found something interesting. A property deed, Talia. Care to explain? My breath caught, but I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, You mean the one that was hidden in my grandmother's chair? The one you sold? His expression faltered, the confidence in his smile cracking. Yeah, I said, stepping closer. You threw away my inheritance, Drew. You sold my grandmother's legacy for $20. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I leaned in just enough to whisper, You really should have asked before touching what wasn't yours. When Drew finally opens my purse one night, he finds a copy of the deed and his face turns the color of ash. There's a special silence before a storm, the kind that tastes like power. For a few long seconds, neither of us moved. Drew stood there, clutching the copy of the deed he'd stolen from my purse, his knuckles white around the paper. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was fear disguised as arrogance. So, he said finally, his voice tight, you've been hiding things from me. I folded my arms, my tone even. Correction, I've been protecting what's mine. He took a step forward, waving the deed like a weapon. This says property ownership. Is this real, Talia? Did your grandmother leave you land? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence between us told him everything he needed to know. His eyes widened. You've been sneaking around out there, haven't you? That's where you've been going all this time. I took a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You wouldn't understand, he scoffed. Try me. Fine, I said, my voice steady. It's a piece of land my grandmother left me. She hid the deed inside that chair, the same chair you sold for $20 because you were too arrogant to ask before doing something stupid. He blinked, his mouth parting slightly. You're lying. Am I? I took a slow step toward him. You sold my family's legacy, Drew. You mocked me for caring about it, and you didn't even realize what you were throwing away. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. You can't just keep something like this from me. We're married, Talia. What's yours is mine. I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that held no humor at all. Not this time. What the hell does that mean? It means that piece of paper doesn't have your name on it. It never will. It was left to me, not us. His voice rose, sharp and desperate. We're supposed to share everything. I've been paying the bills, supporting this house, and you're off playing landowner? I met his anger with ice. You've been supporting yourself with my savings. Don't talk to me about fairness. He froze, his expression faltering for a moment. What did you say? I know what you've been doing, I said quietly. The withdrawals, the cash, the lies. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I took a slow step closer until I was standing just a few feet from him. You sold the only thing that mattered to me, Drew. And in doing so, you gave me something far more valuable: freedom. He stared at me, his face twisting with rage. You can't just walk away with that land. It's ours. You're my wife. Not for long. His voice cracked like thunder. You think you can just cut me out? After everything I've done for you? I tilted my head. You mean after everything you've taken from me? For a moment, the anger drained from his face, replaced by something almost pitiful: disbelief. You're serious, aren't you? I nodded. Completely. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice. Talia, listen to me. I made a mistake, okay? I shouldn't have sold the chair. I get that now. But we can fix this. You and me. If that land is really worth what I think it is, we could sell it. Start over. Move somewhere new. Be happy again. I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. It wasn't guilt talking. It was greed. He didn't care about me or my grandmother's memory. He only cared about what the land could give him. I let out a slow sigh. You don't get it, do you? You already sold your share of that land when you sold my chair. He blinked. That's not how it works. It is now. His composure cracked. He stepped forward abruptly, his face inches from mine. You're not going to keep this from me, Talia. You owe me. I smiled softly, feeling my pulse slow instead of spike. No, Drew. I don't owe you anything. You've taken enough from me. He slammed his hand down on the counter, his voice breaking. You can't just… I already did. He froze, his eyes darting toward the safe behind me, the one I'd stupidly left visible earlier that day. The papers are in there, aren't they? Before I could move, he lunged for it. I stepped between him and the safe, my voice rising for the first time. Don't you dare. Get out of the way, he shouted. I didn't. Instead, I held my ground, meeting his glare with calm fury. It's over, Drew. You don't have any rights to this. The property's been legally filed under my name. Even if you tried to claim it, the law wouldn't back you. He froze, the reality sinking in. His breathing grew uneven, his expression darkening with something ugly, not just anger, but humiliation. You did this on purpose, he muttered. You wanted to make me look like a fool. You did that all by yourself. He stared at me for another long moment, then laughed bitterly. You think you've won? You think you're smarter than me? I said nothing. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You'll regret this. I looked up at him and smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least I'll regret it on land that's mine. He stared at me for a long, tense moment, then turned and stormed out of the house. The door slammed so hard that a picture frame rattled off the wall and hit the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my body melting away. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Not his temper, not his threats, not his control. I walked over to the safe, opened it, and took out the deed. The paper felt cool against my fingertips, delicate, yet stronger than anything he could ever break. He could rage all he wanted, but it didn't matter now. The law was on my side. My grandmother's legacy was mine, and mine alone. And Drew? He had nothing. He lunges for the papers, but I've already filed the ownership in my name, and there's nothing he can do. Sometimes, freedom looks like silence and the sound of a door closing behind you. The next morning, the house felt heavier than ever. Drew's car was gone when I woke up, but the lingering smell of his cologne clung to the air, sharp and suffocating. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the dented wall where the picture frame had fallen last night, and realized I didn't want to spend another day surrounded by ghosts of our arguments. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady for once. It was strange, how calm I felt. For months, even years, I'd been walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do the wrong thing. But now the fear was gone. I had a plan. By the time Drew got home that evening, I would be gone. I called Cora first. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. Talia, are you okay? I'm fine, I said softly. Actually, better than fine. I'm done. Done? I'm leaving him. There was a long pause. Then, do you need help? Just a ride, I said. And maybe your spare room for a few nights. Say no more, she replied. After hanging up, I started packing quietly. I didn't take much, just clothes, some personal items, my grandmother's photos, and the safe with the deed inside. I didn't even bother with the rest. None of it mattered anymore. When I was finished, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. Every corner of that house carried a memory, laughter that had turned into shouting, Apologies that meant nothing. Dreams that had rotted from neglect. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a shell. By noon, I loaded everything into my car. Before leaving, I took one last look at the space where my grandmother's chair had once stood. For a moment, I could almost see her sitting there again, smiling softly, as if she'd been waiting for me to finally understand that letting go doesn't mean losing, it means choosing yourself. I whispered, "Thank you," to the empty room and closed the door behind me. As I drove away, my chest tightened, not from sadness, but relief. The road stretched open before me like a promise. Cora greeted me at her doorstep with a hug that nearly broke me. "You're really doing it," she whispered. "I have to," I said. "If I stay, I'll disappear." She nodded, helping me bring in my bags. "So, what's next?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "The farmhouse." Cora raised her eyebrows. "You're moving there?" "Yes," I said. "It's mine. It's quiet. And it's far away from him." Over the next week, I filed for divorce. Cora helped me through the paperwork, making sure Drew couldn't touch a single cent tied to the property or my new account. When Drew finally called, I didn't answer. The messages started friendly at first, promises, apologies, nostalgia. Then they turned bitter, accusatory, full of venom. "You'll regret this," he said in one voicemail. "You think you can live without me? You're nothing without me, Talia." I deleted every message without listening to the end. By the time I arrived at the farmhouse for good, the renovations were nearly complete. Carl greeted me with a grin. "She's shaping up beautifully," he said. "Give it a few more weeks and she'll be move-in ready." I walked through each room slowly, my fingers brushing against freshly painted walls. The scent of new wood and varnish filled the air, the smell of rebirth. Standing by the window where my grandmother's chair once sat, I felt an ache in my chest, but it wasn't pain, it was peace. That first night in the farmhouse, I slept with the windows open, listening to the sound of crickets and the wind rustling through the trees. The stillness wrapped around me like safety. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet in years. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new rhythm. I woke early, made coffee, worked on plans for the land, and spent evenings reading by the fire. The emptiness of the house no longer scared me, it comforted me. For once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was healing. But peace doesn't last forever, not when you've escaped someone who refuses to let go. One morning, as I sat on the porch with a mug of tea, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Down the long dirt road leading to the house, a car slowed to a stop. My stomach tightened as soon as I recognized the shape of it, the dark gray sedan Drew drove. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, the engine idling, his face barely visible behind the windshield. Then, slowly, he opened the door and stepped out. I set my mug down carefully, my heart pounding. He was the last person I wanted to see, and exactly the one I'd been expecting. But then, one morning, I see a familiar car parked down the dirt road and my heart freezes. Desperation makes liars sound like saints. The morning air was cool, sharp with the scent of rain-soaked earth. I stood on the porch of the farmhouse, my heart pounding as Drew's car idled at the end of the dirt road. For a moment, I thought he might just turn around and leave, but then the engine cut off, and I watched him step out, adjusting his jacket as if this were some casual visit, not the return of the man who had tried to sell my life away. He walked slowly toward the house, hands raised halfway like he wanted to look harmless. I stayed where I was, arms folded across my chest. "Talia," he called, his voice almost gentle. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. "You shouldn't be here, Drew." He gave a strained smile. "I know, but I needed to see you. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stayed silent and let him approach. He stopped a few feet from the steps, his eyes sweeping over the farmhouse. "This place looks nice," he said, his voice tight. "So this is where you've been hiding?" "I'm not hiding," I replied. "I'm living." He winced slightly, like the words stung. "Talia, come on. You left without even giving me a chance to fix things." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Fix what? The marriage? The lies? The way you sold my grandmother's chair like it meant nothing?" He looked away, guilt flickering across his face, or maybe just regret for getting caught. "I made a mistake, okay? But I didn't know what was inside that chair." "That's the point," I said quietly. "You never ask. You never listen. You just take." His shoulders slumped. "I've been thinking about that. About us. We could start over, you know? Sell this place, take the money, and move somewhere new. Fresh start. There it was, the offer I'd known was coming. Wrapped in promises, but reeking of greed. You want me to sell the land? I asked, my voice flat. He hesitated, pretending to choose his words carefully. I'm just saying it's worth a lot, right? I've been reading about that new development project nearby. Developers are paying crazy amounts for land around here. You could make a fortune. We could make a fortune. I tilted my head, studying him. You mean, I could make a fortune? He smiled thinly. Come on, Talia, don't be like that. We were married. Everything we built was together. I took a step down from the porch, closing the space between us just enough for him to see the calm in my eyes. You didn't build this with me, Drew. You almost destroyed it before it even started. His smile faltered. You can't seriously be thinking about keeping this place. You're not a farmer. What are you going to do with a bunch of land and an old house? I shrugged. Whatever I want. He sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. Be reasonable. This is too much for you to handle on your own. That's funny, I said softly. Because I've handled everything on my own since the day you sold that chair. He blinked, the words hitting harder than he expected. You're really not going to sell? No. He took another step forward, his tone shifting softer now. Smoother, almost pleading. Talia, look, I know I messed up, but I'm trying here. I've been miserable without you. Let's just take the money, pay off our debts, start fresh somewhere warm. You used to talk about wanting to travel, we could finally do it. The sadness in his eyes might have fooled someone else, but not me. I could see it, the flicker of greed behind the fake sincerity, the hunger for control he'd lost. You don't want me back, I said quietly. You want what I have. That's not true, he said quickly. I love you. I let out a breathy laugh, shaking my head. No, Drew. You love what I can give you. You always have. His expression hardened, the mask cracking. You're making a mistake, he hissed. You can't keep this place forever. You'll get lonely. You'll run out of money. Then what? I'll still have peace, I said simply. He clenched his fists, his voice rising. You're throwing away everything we had for a piece of dirt. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm reclaiming everything you tried to take from me. He stared at me, breathing hard. For a moment, I thought he might explode, but instead, he stepped back, shaking his head. You'll regret this, he muttered. I swear you will. I held his gaze. Maybe, but I'll regret it on my own terms. He turned sharply, marching back to his car. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes. I watched him grip the steering wheel before slamming his fist against it. Then, without another word, he sped down the road, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. When the silence returned, it was almost soothing. I sat back down on the porch steps, feeling the faint tremor in my hands fade away. He was gone. For now. I knew that tone in his voice, that desperate, vengeful edge. It wasn't over. Men like Drew don't walk away quietly when they realize they've lost control. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of what might come next. I'd built something stronger than his manipulation, a foundation that couldn't be sold or broken. I took a slow sip of my cold tea, watching the horizon shift to gold as the sun dipped behind the trees. The farmhouse stood steady behind me, silent and proud, like a witness to my freedom. Still, a chill crept up my spine as I whispered to myself, he won't give up that easily. And deep down, I knew I was right. He warns me I'll regret turning him down and drives off, leaving dust and dread behind. Sometimes, people destroy what they can't own. The night after Drew's visit, the air felt heavier than usual. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside the farmhouse made me sit up in bed, the creak of old wood, the rustle of wind through the trees, the distant bark of a dog. Part of me told myself I was just being paranoid, but another part knew better. Drew's warning echoed in my mind like a shadow. You'll regret this. I got up and walked through the house, checking the locks on every door and window. Everything seemed fine. The stillness returned, the kind that's almost too quiet, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound louder than your thoughts. I finally drifted off around 2 a.m., wrapped in that fragile calm. It was the smell that woke me. A harsh, bitter scent smoke. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it. The crackling sound of fire. I bolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs, and ran to the window. Flames were licking up the side of the old barn just 50 feet from the house. Dear God, I gasped, rushing for the phone. My hands shook as I dialed 911. There's a fire, my address is. I gave the operator the location, trying to stay calm as I grabbed a jacket and my keys. The fire spread fast, orange light swallowing the night sky. I ran outside, the heat blasting against my face, and turned on the garden hose, spraying water at the edge of the grass to keep the flames from reaching the house. It felt like hours before I heard the wail of sirens. Firefighters arrived, shouting commands as they pulled heavy hoses and moved with terrifying precision. I stood back, trembling, watching them battle the blaze. When the flames finally died down, the barn was a charred skeleton. My throat burned from the smoke, and tears stung my eyes not just from the fumes, but from the realization that this wasn't an accident. The fire chief approached, pulling off his helmet. You the owner? Yes, I managed to say. He nodded grimly. You're lucky you caught it early. If it had, spread to the house. He shook his head. We'll have to investigate, but from what I can tell, it didn't start naturally. There's residue in the grass near the structure, smells like gasoline. I swallowed hard. So, arson? He didn't answer directly, but his eyes said enough. I sat on the porch as the sky began to lighten. The firefighters packing up their equipment. The quiet that followed was worse than the noise. The smell of burnt wood hung in the air like a scar. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to stop shaking. I knew who had done this. There was no doubt in my mind. Cora arrived an hour later, panic etched across her face. Oh my God, Talia, are you okay? I'm fine, I said quietly. The house is okay. The barn's gone. She looked toward the smoldering remains. Do they know what caused it? Gasoline, I said. They're still investigating, but I already know. Her expression hardened. Drew. I nodded. Then you need proof, she said. Real proof. Don't give him a chance to talk his way out of this. She was right, and luckily I'd prepared for something like this weeks ago ever since Drew's behavior started to turn threatening. I stood and led her inside, pulling a small USB drive from the drawer near the front door. The security cameras, I said. Cora blinked. You have cameras out here? I had Carl install them after the first time Drew showed up, I explained. 2 around the barn, 1 by the driveway. We plugged the drive into my laptop, and I opened the footage from the night before. My pulse hammered as I clicked through the timestamps, midnight 1, 2. Then there it was. The beam of headlights flickering across the trees. A dark gray car pulling slowly up the road. The driver's door opening. Drew. He moved quickly, a gas can in his hand, his head turning nervously as he glanced around. He walked straight toward the barn. Moments later, the first faint glow appeared in the corner of the screen. I stopped the video, my breath trembling. There's your proof, Cora said, her voice low and full of fury. You take that straight to the police. By the time the officers arrived later that morning, the evidence was undeniable. I handed them the USB drive, along with copies of the threatening voicemails Drew had left. The lead investigator, a calm man with kind eyes, nodded after reviewing the footage. We'll take it from here, ma'am. You did the right thing. As their patrol cars disappeared down the road, I finally sat down and let myself cry, not out of fear this time, but out of release. For so long, I'd lived under Drew's control, his criticism, his manipulation, his greed. But now I had proof that the man who once claimed to love me had tried to destroy everything I'd built. That afternoon, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Rayner, the officer said, we have your husband in custody. He's being charged with attempted arson and property destruction. I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. Thank you, I said softly. When I hung up, I walked outside and stood where the barn had once been. The ground was black and still smoking in places, the ashes curling in the breeze. And yet, even with the wreckage before me, I didn't feel broken. I felt strong. Because fire might destroy wood and metal but not resolve, not truth, not legacy. As the sun set over the fields, I whispered into the smoky air, you lost, Drew, and I finally won. For the first time, I realized justice doesn't always need fire sometimes, it needs patience. Every scar tells a story, but some scars bloom into strength. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream. The farmhouse still carried the scent of smoke, faint but lingering, a reminder of what had nearly been lost. The barn was gone completely. Nothing left but a patch of blackened soil and a few twisted beams. Yet somehow I didn't see destruction when I looked at it. I saw survival. Drew was behind bars, awaiting trial. The police had all the evidence they needed, the security footage, the gas can with his fingerprints, the threatening voicemails. The restraining order came through quickly, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. Cora stayed by my side through it all. She helped me meet with insurance agents, file repair claims, and talk to contractors. When I finally broke down one night, crying into her shoulder, she just held me and said, "You didn't lose anything, Talia. You reclaimed everything." And she was right. Day by day, I started rebuilding not just the property, but myself. Carl and his team came back to restore what had been burned. "We'll get her standing taller than before," he said, patting one of the remaining fence posts. His optimism was contagious. Watching the crew work gave me something to look forward to again. As the barn was rebuilt, I poured my energy into the house. I repainted the kitchen, polished the floors, and hung photos of my grandmother, small reminders of the woman who'd started all this without ever saying a word. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the window, I placed her rocking chair in the perfect spot right by the glass panes overlooking the fields. The wood gleamed, restored, and warm, just as I remembered. I sat in it for the first time since bringing it home, my fingers tracing the smooth arms of the chair. The creak beneath me was gentle, familiar. It felt like coming full circle. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." From that day on, I made the farmhouse more than just a home. I decided to share it. With Cora's help, I turned the upstairs rooms into guest spaces, a small, charming bed and breakfast. People from nearby towns started visiting, drawn by the peace and history of the place. I called it Kingston Rest, in honor of my grandmother. The first time I saw a family sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and laughing as the morning fog lifted off the fields, I felt something inside me settle. This house, this land was no longer a symbol of what I'd lost. It was proof of what I could build. The townspeople began to know me by name. Some called me the chair lady after hearing the story. I told new guests a simplified version, of course. I never mentioned Drew or the fire. I only said, "It all started with a chair and a secret my grandmother left behind." One afternoon, as I was arranging fresh flowers in the common room, Carl stopped by. "You've really turned this place around," he said, glancing around proudly. "Couldn't have done it without you," I replied. He chuckled. "You'd have figured it out. You've got that look, the kind that doesn't quit." I smiled. "Maybe, but it helps having people who believe in you." When he left, I sat by the window, watching the sun dip low over the newly painted barn. The light cast a warm glow across the fields, turning the grass into waves of gold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt alive. Cora came to visit often. We'd sit outside with tea, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, she looked out at the horizon and said, "You ever think about selling this place?" I shook my head immediately. "Never. This isn't just land, Cora. It's legacy." She smiled knowingly. "I figured you'd say that." Sometimes at night, I'd still hear echoes, the creak of the rocking chair, the faint hum of my grandmother's lullaby in the back of my mind. But those sounds didn't haunt me anymore. They comforted me. They reminded me how far I'd come, and how much strength could hide behind silence. Business at Kingston Rest grew slowly but steadily. Travelers left kind notes and reviews, calling the farmhouse a place that feels like home. Every kind word was a small victory. One evening, as I sat by the window reading, the mail truck pulled up. I didn't think much of it until I opened the letter the driver handed me. It was crisp, official-looking with a logo I recognized. It was from the development company Drew had once mentioned. I hesitated, then tore it open. The letter inside was short, polite, and to the point. They were offering to buy my land, all of it, for an amount that made my hands shake. I sat back, staring at the paper. The sum was enough to change my life completely. Enough to move anywhere, start over fresh, live comfortably for decades. But as I looked out the window at the rocking chair, at the barn rebuilt from ashes, at the land that had carried my grandmother's love through generations, I felt my answer forming before I even realized it. Money could buy a house, but it couldn't buy this. Still, I couldn't help but wonder why, after everything, the universe was testing me again. Until one evening a letter arrives from the developer Drew mentioned, with an offer that makes my heart skip a beat. Sometimes revenge means knowing when to say no, even when it's worth millions. The letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I could bring myself to touch it again. Each time I passed by, my eyes drifted to the number typed in bold, an amount that could have erased every worry I'd ever had. It wasn't just money. It was security, opportunity, freedom wrapped in zeros. But as I looked around the farmhouse at the walls I'd painted with my own hands, the polished floorboards that still creaked like my grandmother's laughter, the view from the window where her chair sat quietly by the light, I felt torn. Cora came by on the 3rd morning, coffee in hand. "So," she said, glancing at the envelope, "you gonna tell me what's got you? Looking like you've seen a ghost?" I slid the paper toward her. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening. "Talia, this is a lot of money." "I know." She set the paper down, giving me a long, searching look. "And?" I sighed, resting my elbows on the table. "And I don't know. It would solve everything. But it would mean letting go," she finished for me. I nodded. "This land," I said softly. "It's not just property. It's the last piece of my grandmother I have left. It's where I rebuilt my life. If I sell it, I feel like I'm selling that too." Cora leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Then maybe the money isn't worth it." I smiled faintly. "You sound just like her." "Your grandmother?" "Yeah," I said. "She used to tell me that some things aren't meant to be traded, even for gold." The next morning, I drove into town. The developer's office was sleek and modern, glass walls and white marble floors, the kind of place that smelled like money. A man in a suit greeted me with a bright, rehearsed smile. "Mrs. Rayner, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured toward a polished table where a folder already waited, the offer printed neatly inside. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "You've made quite an offer," he chuckled. "We like to think it's more than fair. The land's location is ideal for our new community expansion. We'd love to make this a smooth, generous transaction." I looked him in the eye. "And what happens to the house?" He hesitated for a second too long. "Well, it would be removed, of course. We plan to build modern homes on the property." I smiled politely. "I see." He leaned forward. "You'd be set for life, Mrs. Rayner. No more worries, no more upkeep, no more." He gestured vaguely toward the old farmhouse. Speaking. "Do you believe every piece of land has a story?" He blinked. "Pardon?" "Stories," I repeated. "The people who walked on it, worked on it, dreamed on it. My grandmother lived her life on that land. She built it, she loved it, she protected it even from people like you." His professional smile faltered. "Mrs. Rayner, I'm not selling," I said simply. The silence stretched between us. He leaned back, clearing his throat. "Are you sure? This is a once-in-a-lifetime offer." I stood. "So was the life my grandmother gave me. And I'm not selling that for any price." His voice softened as I turned to leave. "You're walking away from a fortune." I paused in the doorway. "No," I said over my shoulder. "I'm walking toward peace." The moment I stepped outside, the cool air hit me like freedom. I drove straight to the cemetery, parking beside the small hill where my grandmother's gravestone rested under an old oak tree. The wind rustled through the branches as if whispering secrets only I could hear. I knelt by the stone, brushing a few fallen leaves away. "I almost sold it," I admitted softly. "The house, the land, everything you left me. But I couldn't. It didn't feel right." The sun broke through the clouds, warm and bright on my face. For a moment, it felt like she was there, not gone, just resting somewhere in the quiet. "I think you knew this would happen," I said. "You hid that deed because you wanted me to find my own strength. And I did." I stayed there for a while, talking to her about the house, the bed and breakfast, and the guests who filled it with laughter and life. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter, like I'd finally finished a chapter that had started long before I was born. That night, I sat in the rocking chair by the window. The stars were bright, the air cool. I held a cup of tea in one hand and the deed in the other, folded neatly, its edges worn, but strong, just like me. The quiet around me was no longer empty. It was full of meaning, of memory, of resilience. I thought about everything I'd been through, Drew's betrayal, the fire, the loneliness, the fear, and how all of it had led me here, to this peace I'd carved out for myself. Revenge hadn't come from destruction, it had come from rebuilding, from living better, fuller, stronger than he ever imagined I could. I leaned back in the chair, smiling faintly. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered. "You saved me twice, once with love, and once with wisdom." The farmhouse creaked gently, as if answering me. And just as the stars settle outside, I hear a car door slam. Someone's come to the house again. Every ending begins with something once lost and something finally found. The sound of the car door slamming pulled me from my thoughts. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened. After everything that had happened, my mind still jumped to the worst possibilities: Drew, his anger, his chaos. But when I looked out the window, the tension melted away. It wasn't Drew. It was Henry and Lila, the older couple who had unknowingly saved my grandmother's secret all those months ago. I stepped onto the porch as they made their way up the gravel path. Lila smiled warmly, her white hair glinting in the afternoon light. "We were in the area," she said, "and thought we'd stop by to see how you and the chair were doing." I laughed softly, motioning for them to come inside. "You have no idea how perfect your timing is." The moment they stepped through the door, their eyes widened. The farmhouse was alive now, sunlit, warm, filled with the scent of lavender and freshly baked bread. The rocking chair sat proudly by the window, polished and whole again. "Oh my," Lila whispered. "It's beautiful, Talia. You've done wonders with this place." Henry nodded, his gaze softening. "Looks like it finally found the right home," I smiled, leading them toward the sitting area. "It did. You both helped make that happen." We sat together, and I poured tea, the kind my grandmother used to make chamomile with honey. The air between us felt calm, full of unspoken gratitude. Henry took a sip and looked around. "You know," he said, "when we found that envelope in the chair, we figured it might mean something important. But I don't think we realized how important." I glanced at the rocking chair, the sunlight casting a warm glow across its curved arms. "That envelope changed my life," I said quietly. "You gave me back more than a piece of furniture. You gave me my grandmother's last gift." Lila reached over and squeezed my hand. "I think she'd be proud of you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, my eyes stung with tears. "I hope so," I whispered. "Because everything I've done since finding that letter, it's all been for her." We spent the afternoon talking. I told them about the renovations, the fire, even about Drew, though I softened the details. I didn't want to linger on the pain, only on what came after it. When they stood to leave, Lila looked back at the chair one last time. "It's funny," she said softly. "Some things seem small when you first find them, but they end up holding entire lives inside." I nodded. That chair held everything I needed, I just didn't know it yet. After they drove away, the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't the lonely kind of quiet I used to dread. It was peaceful, the kind that feels like a deep breath after a storm. I walked over to the rocking chair and sat down. The wood was smooth, warm from the sunlight. I leaned back, letting the gentle rhythm of the motion calm me. From that spot, I could see everything: the rebuilt barn, the open fields swaying in the breeze, the horizon that stretched farther than my eyes could follow. Every piece of it told a story. I thought about the woman I'd been when this all started, the one who cried over a sold chair, who felt powerless in her own home, who believed love meant staying quiet. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone stronger, sharper, unbreakable. As the chair rocked, I ran my hand over the armrest, tracing the same grooves my grandmother's fingers once did. "You knew, didn't you?" I murmured. "You knew I'd find my strength here." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees like a soft answer. I thought about Drew, about the fire, the betrayal, and how easily his greed had consumed him. But I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance. His name no longer held power over me. He was just a shadow that had already burned away. In the months that followed, Kingston Rest flourished. Guests came and went, each leaving behind laughter, stories, and gratitude. The farmhouse became a place of renewal, not just for me, but for everyone who stepped through its doors. Sometimes guests would ask about the rocking chair. "It looks antique," they'd say. "What's the story behind it?" I'd smile, brushing my hand over the smooth wood. "It belonged to my grandmother," I'd reply. "She hid something special inside it once, something that changed my life." Most would smile politely, not realizing the depth behind those words. But a few, the ones who had loved and lost and rebuilt, would nod as if they understood completely. At night, when the last guest light went out and the house fell still, I'd sit in that chair, the deed folded neatly in my pocket where it belonged. The stars outside shimmered like promises, and the world finally felt right again. This wasn't revenge in the cruel sense. It wasn't about seeing Drew punished or watching him fall. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my voice, my peace, my power. That was the real justice. I'd spent so long trying to protect my grandmother's memory, but in the end, it was her memory that had protected me. I leaned back, the chair creaking softly, and whispered into the quiet, "We made it, Grandma. You and me." The fields outside glowed silver in the moonlight, and a soft breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the faint scent of lavender and old wood. And as the farmhouse breathed around me alive, whole, and mine, I smiled. Because they sold my chair for pennies, but I found my freedom for everything. And with the deed still safe in my pocket, I smile because they sold my chair for pennies, but I found my freedom for everything.